That last guy sold up. Last guy had to be more too.
Wow. Multiple. Okay, let's see where we are holding here. We are holding, I'm going to go back to the Mishnah because it's a very small daf, so we can catch up. Beged sheyatza chutz l'kloim, a beged that left the azara, and it had a dam on it. So the halach is nichnas umechapsoi b'makom kodesh. You got to bring it back in. What if it was nitma chutz l'kloim? So if it became tummy, how are you going to get it back in? The halach is kairai. You tear it, so now it loses its shem of its original beged, and then you could bring it back in. The same thing would be with the klicher shiyatzachot l'klayim, nichnas v'shover b'makom kadosh, nitma chutz l'klayim, became tamei noikvai, and then the nichnas v'shover b'makom kadosh. And the same with klin chayshas shiyatzachot l'klayim, nichnas umorkoi v'shoitvai b'makom kadosh, but nitma chutz l'klayim. So you have to damage it to the point where it would lose its tumah. Then nichnas umarkoi v'shayt by b'vachim kodesh. Maskav lo ravina kairoi. If you tear it, it's no longer a beged, and it's a beged that requires kibbutz. Beged amar rachmana v'lav begedu. So the Gemara, the Mishayir Bay kedei mafayers. You won't be able to tear the beged completely in half. You'd have to leave at least enough that there would be like the size of a little shmata, so that it would still retain the same beged. It loses the original tumah that it has, because it's no longer the beged that it was, but it still has the din of a beged, and therefore you're still mekayim, washing the beged to get the dam of the chatos out. Zog to Gemara weiter. Eini, is that so? V'ya amar Avhuna lo shanu al shloshar b'kedei mafaris, al shloshar b'kedei mafaris chiber hava, and it still would be tumah. It would retain its original tumah. So how could you bring it back into the Hazara? Going on to Amar and the Gemara midirabanan, midiraisa, it lost its tumah. It's only midirabanan achumra gzeira dilma loy asi lemikruba. Just in case someone might not tear it enough, so they say you have to tear completely. Aval midiraisa tahira, and therefore umuter lachnisa mishamitzvas kibus. Okay, Zog to Hedek Gemara weiter. Klei cheresh shiyata. The same situation. So Zog to Gemara, if you made a kli, if you made a hole in the keli, so you made it ois keli, so but you have the same problem. Why does it need breaking? Kliyo marachmana v'loy kliyu. So why would you break it once you've already broken it outside? So Gemara shenikev b'shayrish cotton. What is this nikev b'shayrish cotton? There's a lot of talk about this in the Rishonim. Because if it's ois keli, it's ois keli. That's why it would lose its tumah. But how could you say that it lost its tumah because it's ois keli, but it's still a keli l'gabe shvira? So Rashi says as follows: V'gabe kli cheres ikol meimar the noikvoy de masnisen. The whole of the Mishnah is b'moitzi mashke litoher ba'adayin klihu l'kabel zeisim. So we're saying although it can no longer hold mashke, it could still hold zeisim, and therefore it would still retain its din of a keli. The small shining is hot, don't he? It would still retain its same status of a keli. Now Tosfos speculates how that would work, because we know if it's a kli for Michael, then it has to be, the hole has to be big enough that it shouldn't be able to do what its original function is. And if it's a kli for mashke, it's the same thing. And if it's a kli for both, then you have to go back to the chumrah, and it has to be disabled even from holding a big thing. So Tosfos wants to be mechadish that this keli is different, because this keli is made to use in its solids and liquids together. You're cooking basar. There's water and there's basar, and therefore, if it was nikeh just kemotzi mashke, it would be enough to make it ois tamei, but it would still be a keli. Zog to Gemara weiter. If you totally break the whole keli, v'lav klihu. What do you do is After you make a hole in it, you bang out the copper to stretch it to close up the hole. As Rashi says, maka alav b'kornis, you hit it with a hammer, and therefore v'chazer shem kli alav. So it lost its shem kli, it lost its tuma, and then you fix it. Tosfos doesn't like it because Tosfos holds by metal keli, the tuma comes back. So Tosfos learns the Ratzav Meritzav means you literally transform the keli. You turn it inside out. Using a hammer, you actually turn the whole keli inside out. So it remains a keli, but it's definitely not the same keli that it was. Omar Shlakish. Me'il shenitma. What if the me'il of the Kohen Gadol became tamei? And you have to be able to be metahired, and you got to take the blood out. We're talking about dam chatas came on it. You have to take out the dam inside the azara, but the problem is you're not allowed to bring it into the azara. So what are we going to do? Zok Rashi, me'il shall big the kahuna shenit is a lot dam chatas the yotza chutz lakoyim, and there it became tamei. So what do? So you have to be machnis mokim adam lefnei. You don't bring the whole ma'il inside. You just bring in that little section of it that has dam. Machnisoi bepachos misholosh al sholosh umechapsoi, and you could wash it. Zokt Rashi, why pachos misholosh al sholosh? 3 etzbois by 3 etzbois is the minimum shear that can be used for a patch. Less than that, for sure, it would not be mekabel tuma. She'enim akne shear beged tamei lazora. It's not like another beged you could tear. You can't tear them at all. Now, the problem is, what if someone's tummy and he sticks his little pinky in? He'll be chayiv for entering the Beis Hamikdash with Tamasai. So, Zok Toisus, there's a small little Toisus at the bottom. Machnise pachas mishalis. Afilu l'man da'amar bereish kol apsulim bia b'miktzah shma bia. Even walking into the kodesh, a tiny part of your body, that's enough to violate the isser of going into the Beis Hamikdash. When you tame, shiny beged, a beged doesn't have that rule. Your finger you can't cut off, but a piece of a beged you could cut off. And since technically you could cut it off, therefore you don't say bia b'mikdash shma bia, and therefore that little bit of tamei beged coming in will not be a concern. I don't understand. Why is it that you need to bring it in such a small amount? I don't see what the problem is. Even a bigger amount wouldn't be royal kabbatum. Why is that? Because the Mishnah tells us for oven, if it's very thick fabric that doesn't lend itself to being a patch, rather it would need to be a larger piece of fabric that you could use for a rug or something larger, or varachin, if they're like felt. So again, it's not a woven beged. Again, it wouldn't be able to use for a patch. It would just be able to be used as a big pad. They won't be mekabel tuma with a small share of shalosh or shalosh, because such fabric in such a small quantity wouldn't even be able to be used for a patch. So Rashi, the lav levisha chazoi, you can't wear something that small. The lav lesakin ben chaluk, and you can't use it as a patch either. All you could use such a fabric for as elul to sit on it, and therefore you need shlosh you need 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim. That's a larger beged that you could sit on. Now the umeil avu, what does the me'il have to do with this? Because the me'il is a very, very thick garment. Kedekayim alam to say the yuma. Hutan kafel shnei moser. Each thread was 12 threads spun together. Va'afilu shalosh al shalosh yachnas, and therefore even a small little beged of 3 by 3, you should be able to bring into the azara. Why is it that Rish Lakish said you have to bring it in pachas mishalosh al shalosh? Zok Gemara, the answer is very simple. This is not a standalone piece of fabric. It's connected to the me'il. Agav avi and chashivi. It's connected to the me'il. That gives it chashivas. As Rashi says, Agav u'an kishu mechuber bebeged na choshev gimel al gimel dida. Then even a little portion of it is considered choshev. and therefore you have to bring in less than that amount into the Azara and then spot clean it. Okay, correct Gemara, but we have another problem. How do you get a blood stain out? There's actually a very specific set of chemicals required that have to be applied in a very specific fashion. Correct Gemara, Baboy Shiva Samamonim. The Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Dam Chatos, Umaris Nagoyim, Tzarichin Shiva Samamonim. They require 7 Samamonim. And one of them is Meiraglayim. And we know you're not allowed to bring Meiraglayim into the Azara. So if we say it in Pita Baktaris every day, and in Karbonis, so how in the world are you going to wash out this blood stain if you absolutely require Meiraglayim, and Meiraglayim is not allowed inside the Azara? Sorry? Yeah, everything had to be inside the Azara.
That was the story about the Rogator.
What was the Rogator?
Somebody asked him when I still want to say for it, he was like,
Oh, that's right.
he like feel through it like this, and he goes,
So you said you should call it Yenka Friesen. Shafilu Meiraglayim Yofin.
Actually, Yenka Friesen. Why Yenka Friesen?
That's right. The guy said, if you're not going to give me a skama, at least suggest a name for the sefer so that I can say I showed it to the Rogachover and he suggested this name. He says, oh, I have a perfect idea.
Yenka Friesen.
Yeah. That's like a Chaim Tzvi story where they unearthed an old sefer from Kadmonim, and it was a Kabbalah sefer, and they wanted to know if they could destroy it or if it has to be Sheamus. So they showed it to a gadol, I don't know which gadol it was, and he comments on V'hinei Malach Elakim Olim V'Yordim Bo. So it's brought down in Rashi that the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz, he was leaving Eretz Yisrael at the time, right? So the Malachim of Eretz Yisrael were going up, and the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz were going down, right? So he asked, why do they need a ladder? They're Malachim, they can fly. So he answers in the Sefer, they must have been baby Malachim, they couldn't fly yet. So the Rav says, you know what, you don't have to put us to Sheamus, you could bury the Sefer. Break the Gemara. The and if you're going to say you have a solution, I have a simple solution. The mivlo lahu ba'ad shivas amanim. You could be mevatel. There were 7 chemicals required. So if you mix meriglaim into the 7 chemicals, then the meriglaim will be nisbatel, and therefore uma'aver lahu lokulu kachad, and you will apply them all together. If you would try this, you would lose your customers.
There was like a bunch of pails. Detergent.
But one of them, the mivlu, that's why they call it dry cleaning, because they don't even want you to have a minute that they use megline. We don't even use anything wet. And they apply it as one big mixture, but now that doesn't work. If you use them not in the right sequence as specified, or you mix them all together, which means the meraglaim has to be on its own, applied at the right time. So how in the world are you going to get meraglaim into the Azara? And if you're going to say, okay, you mix it in with one of them, that's impossible again. You got to pour each chemical on and then scrub it with each chemical individually. So you can't mix the meraglaim with anything. Elo, you know what you would do? The mivla lahu b'roig tofel. Roig tofel is the saliva that comes out of a mummy that you woke up after 4,000 years, and it smells like his breath. That's what roig tofel is. It's the first, from the first morning breath of a person, it's his roig. From there, so it was mixed. You mixed the meraglaim with that. The Amar Rish Lakish said, "Roik tofel tzorich sheim kol echad vechad." Roik tofel, you have to mix with all of the different chemicals, including the meraglaim. So what you would do is, if you mix the meraglaim with the roik tofel, and you were able to sort of overpower the meraglaim with the roik tofel, then you would be able to bring it into the azar. Okay, gewaltig. It seems like freshly laundered begodim in those days didn't smell so good. But this is how they did things back then. What's that? That's right, they didn't have Tide. Okay, gewaltig. I was asking someone yesterday what type of detergent they used to use before we learned this Gemara. And then they told me it's a dumb question. So now we know the answer. You have to use the specific someone. So Tosfos asks a very obvious kasha. The Gemara asks this whole kasha with the Meir Glayim. The Gemara asks this kasha on who? On Rish Lakish, who brought up that the me'il you're going to have to wash. What does it have to do with Rish Lakish? Why didn't the Gemara ask directly in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says you wash things out in the Azara. How do you bring the detergent into the Azara? What does this have to do with Rish Lakish? Why didn't the Gemara ask us right on the Mishnah? Zog Tosfos is a very interesting chiddush. Let's see Tosfos. V'boy shivus habaman and pierce bekuntris damas nizambar. Rashi Taka learned the kasha is on the Mishnah, but the kasha, if it's Taka a question on the Mishnah, the lo'il havelalakshuye right after the Mishnah, before introducing Rish Lakish shaila about the me'il, is where this question should have been asked. V'nir de Rish Lakish dav kapara. We're only asking according to Rish Lakish. The Iri bebig day kahuna behedja. The Mishnah doesn't discuss specifically dam going on big day kahuna. It discusses dam on a beged. It's only Rish Lakish who presents the case of dam going on the klisharis on big day kahuna. What's the relevance of that? There was a very strong detergent that they used to use that was not one of these 7 sabbamonim that would have got the bloodstain out without a problem. But you can't use this very powerful detergent on the me'il. Tzavin is so strong, it will take the blue dye out of the me'il and it'll mess it up. Multi knows you have to worry when you do glass cleaning, you have to make sure that the color is fast and your detergent, while it takes out the stain, it doesn't take out the dye in the fabric. Therefore it asks the dafkar Rish Lakish. Because Rish Lakish says, referring to the big teguna, the me'il was only worn by the Kohen Gadol. But the problem is, any big teguna would have been a problem taking out the pigment. But if it's a white pigment, it shouldn't be a problem. If it's a white pigment, it shouldn't be a problem. The me'il is blue. Umiu amilsa de rabba baravua gufei de kamer dam chata sumaris the goyim tzrichen zayin samamonim navi have a machzir lakshuye ha'ein machlisin meir aglayim lamikdash. They said you need these shivim samamonim. You can't bring them into the base of mikdash. But I'll call upon them. We know there was another type of detergent, but it was hard on colors, and that's why they didn't use it. A baguette for the hedget? Of course, we take it out of the Zohar. But we're talking about, since the reason why it has to be in the Zohar at this point is not because it's a big dekuna. The meal is allowed to come out of the Zohar. It's because in order to wash it, it has to be in the Zohar. Because the kibbutz has to be in the Zohar. So it's holding this into the Zohar is not the fact that it's big dekuna.
Take it out of the Zohar, then why do you have to wash it?
Because the halacha is if dam chatos goes on the beggar, the Torah says that it has to be washed after in the Zohar. Okay, gewaltig. Okay, Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Echad shabi shalboy. This already is a very important sugya. Echad shabi shalboy. This is Allah lamaisa, because we have a very famous. We know that Irei Kli Rishon we consider that bishul. So when we make our coffee on Shabbos, nobody would ever put coffee into a cup and put water directly from the chinik into their cup. That's Irei Kli Rishon. We call that bishul, right? It's called cooked. And you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. That actually is a very, very controversial shita, because there are those who hold that Irei Kli Rishon will not be mavashal. So let's have a look. Echad shabi shalboy. Say a pot in which the chatas was cooked in, talking about a metal pot, or no, even a cheres pot. The echad she'ira l'soicha reseach. What if you didn't cook the chatas in it? You just poured from a Kli Rishon into it hot water from the cooking of the chatos. Echad kachim kachim, echad kachim kalim, to unin marika or shtifa. It will need marika and shtifa. Rabbi Shimon Omer kachim kalim ain to unin marika or shtifa. This is not required for kachim kalim. Right away, fragt Rashi, Vim Taimer Harei Abalua Nasa Noiser. Forget the special chiyuv to wash out the pot. Why aren't the beliyos noiser? And if you cook in that same pot a week later, the beliyos of noiser are going to come and aser whatever you're cooking in it. Upoel te beheter lachizma. Zok the Gemara, Zok Rashi, a very important Allah. Moidi Rab Shimon de Bayagala Baroischin. Avad you need Hagala. Mariko Shtiva doesn't mean Hagala. Hagala you need because you got to get out the beliyos of iser in this pot. But in Mutaris Mariko Shtiva who dimimayitle. It's only Marika and Shtiva that's not required. Now, do you know that Hagala technically you can make with wine? You could do Hagala with wine, but Marika or Shtiva has to be dafka down with water. You'd be able to make Hagala on Kalim that cooked kachim kalim even with wine or yain mozug. But Marika Shtiva has to be with water. So that's the requirement that's not required by Kachim Kalim. Marika Shtiva is inside and the outside. Tanu Rabbanim. It says in the pasuk what type of kli cheres has to be destroyed if you cook chatas in it. Asher tavu shalboy. If you cooked in it, only el shabi shalboy. So that means you have to actually cook the chatos in the pot. But ira l'saycha. What if you just poured from a kli rishon into this pot? How do you know that kli cheres also has to be destroyed? Talmud loimer v'asher tavu shalboy yishaver. What is the limud? Zok Rashi, midesamach yishaver etzel boy. So it says boy yishaver. Not only if it's cooked in, but boy yishaver. If it has any content, blias of the chatos, it has to be broken as well. Mideksiv yishaver etzel boy v'loy kasav im bechli cheres tivushal yishaver. Rather, it says boy yishaver lemedrash im nivla boy mikol makoy yishaver. Not only if you cooked into klei cheres, but even if there are blias of the klei cheres. Boy Rami Bar Chava. What would be if toloi ba'avir tanir? You have a tanur, and you don't lower the meat of the chatas into the tanur. You suspend it in the air above the tanur, so the heat comes out of the tanur and cooks it. So it is being cooked by this klei cheres, but the tanur is not absorbing any blias of it because it's not even in it. So what would be the law? Are you going to say it's only going to require shvira if you both cook in it and it's boileya blias of the chatos? Or maybe it's enough. The fact is, you cooked meat using the heat of this oven, even though the oven would not have absorbed any of the tam. Maybe that oven is mandated by the Torah to be destroyed as well. Amar Rabba Tashma. Let's see if we can bring a raya. The Mishnah says, "Echad shabishal boy, ve'echad she'ira l'soich hareisayach." So you see clearly that it's one or the other. So no, you don't. The Mishnah is just saying, even if you only have ira l'soich hareisayach, even if you only have belias and not bishul, that would require shvira, and that's not what our shaila is. Our shaila is kikami bailan bishul b'loy bilua mai. We want to know what bishul b'loy bilua. So you could learn the Mishnah echad shebishul if you cooked in it. So therefore, sayu bishul and sai b'lias, or ve'echad shir l'sech where you only have b'lias but you didn't cook in it. But if you only cooked in it, that's not necessarily what the Mishnah means to tell us that it needs to be broken. So Tashma, the Omer of Nachman, Omer Rabba Baravua, Tanur Shal Mikdash, the oven in the base of Mikdash was Shal Matches. They actually had an oven that was made out of metal. It was not made out of cheres. Break the Gemara, v'isol kedaitek. If you hold that bishul ubelua, if you're going to hold, you need both. But bishul alone, there's not going to be an iser. V'isol kedaitek bishul beloy belua loy kaped. You hung a piece of meat over an oven. The piece of meat was never inside the oven, but the heat that's radiating out of the oven will cook the meat. It's like a rotisserie. So the izog that bishul beloy below loy kapid, or you need
Bishul.
both.
Bishul's usually in the pot.
But we consider bishul. If you put meat on the barbecue on Shabbos, are you chayiv? You're chayiv because of mavasal. There's no isser tzli. It's bishul. So it's one heading. Okay, Zok to Gemara. So in the average shel cheres, if you hold that bishul beloy belua, there's no hakpada. So now shel cheres. We could have had another. What's the whole problem? Why it had to be made out of metal? So that you should be able to. You should be able to kasher it, right? Why would they have an oven of metal in the Beit HaMikdash? Because they're constantly using it to cook karbonis, to be eaten, and we don't want you have to. We don't have to break it. So they made it out of metal, but make it out of cheres. If you hold bishul beloy belua, wouldn't be a problem. So make it out of cheres, and it would have worked just fine. Because you're telling me bishul beloy belua doesn't need to be broken. Zok to Gemara, you're right. If the only thing that we cooked in it was meat, you can have bishul without belias, and we would be able to go with the cheres oven. The reason why we go with a metal oven is for a different problem. Even the ika shiyari menachos, the afiyasan bitanur, the shiyari menachos you couldn't hang above the tanur. Those you had to put in the wall of the oven itself. So there would be the ika bishul ubi lua. So for those you have no choice, and therefore avdin and shalmatchis, so that they would be able to. Kasher it. Okay, gewaltig. And this is not al tamchatas, this is al tablis of Neusar. Hahu tanura, there was this oven, the otchu beiti chaya. It was smeared with fat, fleishiga fat. So now you have fleishiga fat in this oven. Osra rabba bar ahilai, lemechla lerifta la'olam. Any bread that would be cooked in this oven, baked in this oven, forever, he answered. Because it's fleishiga bread, and he didn't even let you eat it with parrot. Even with salt. Why? Dilma osi lo michla b'kuscha. We know that Allah you're not allowed to bake milchiga bread because people assume bread is parv, and they might eat with fleishiks. So every bit of bread that would be baked in this oven, according to Rabbi Bar Hilai, would be fleishiks because of the fat that was smeared on the side of this oven, and therefore. Any bread you ever bake in here, you're not allowed to use. So don't use this oven ever to bake bread in. In other words, no matter what you do, you can't kasher this up. It says, "Ein loshen es isha b'chalal." You're not allowed to make a milchiga bread. V'im losh, and if you'd made milchiga bread, kol apas kula asura. Why? B'pnei hergel avera. As Rashi says, shelo yoichel apas imabasar. You don't know. Kayoytzaboy. So too, and even Danishes, by the way, cheese Danishes are never, I don't think they ever completely conceal the cheese in the Danish. If you notice, it's a different format. It's like a bow tie, you always see the cheese on it. I'm not sure if that's mandated by the Poiskim, so that it should be obvious that the Danish is not a part of a Danish. Mm-hmm. I think I once heard that. Vimlosh kolapas kula asura, like an apple turnover, you don't know what's inside. Whenever there's a cheese Danish, it's always obvious that it's a cheese Danish. I'm sorry? Oh, see, I'm not so holy. I looked.
I don't even know what a Danish is.
I looked. They didn't eat.
Get ready.
I hear. Okay. Why? On a similar vein, ain't toshin as a tanner ba'alna. You're not allowed to flesh a guy. You're not allowed to smear the oven with meat fat. Vimtosh, again, Vimtosh, I love Tosh. Vimtosh, Kol Hapas, Kula Asura. But Ad Sheyasik is a tanner until you kasher. If you heat up the oven, it'll get it out. So it's a stira. Tiyufta, the Rabbi Bar Eli Tiyufta. This shugs of Rabbi Eli. Because Rabbi Bar Eli said there's no way to fix this. You hear the bride, you see, you could cook it out. Omalei Rabbeinu Rashi, the Chimei Acher di Toisev, Rabbi Bar Eli. Now that Rabbi Bar Eli is Augustlogan, and my Omer Rav, so why did the Rav say? So we just agreed that even if it's an oven of cheres, if you heat it up really well, it will deplete and suck out all of the blias. Now that we've come to this conclusion, so why did the Rav say Kederis Pesach Yishbru? If you have pots of cheres, you have to break them for Pesach. You can't keep them because you can't get the chametz out. Why not? Why should you break it? Why don't you heat it up? Just like the Brisa says, Achiyasik is a tanner. Be masik The
Those were-
Kedeiros. I'm sorry?
Those were earthenware, no, those were Paris.
We're talking about Cheres here. Everything's Cheres here. No, we're talking about Cheres. This whole Gemara was talking about Cheres. The only thing that we discussed was metal, was the oven in the Beis Hamikdash. But everything else was Cheres. Now we're going to introduce metal. Amalei,
How does firing it up kasher?
because when you heat it up, it will come out.
Paris?
Yes, that is the shaila. Rabbi Bar Hilai said no, it'll never come out. There'll always be some left that's going to leach out, and that's why you can't make bread in it. But the Brisa says once you're masik the tanner, it'll come out. That's exactly the discussion. But if it will come out, so why can't you kasher cheres pots for Pesach? Amalei Rav Muchi Lolahi B'Shal Matches. Rav changed the whole story. Rav said the Brisa that says Achiyasik is a tanner, that's talking about a metal tanner. So now Rabbi Bar Hilai is no more Ogerschlagen. Because Rabbi Bar Hilai was saying there's a lacha by a cheres tanner. It'll never come out. Rav said Kederes by Pesach Yishbru because it's cheres, it'll never come out. The Brisa that says it will come out, that's speaking about metal, which is how you would understand it. But even by cheres, even by a cheres it comes out. And Rabbi Bar Hilai is Ogerschlagen. So why can't you kasher Kederes by Pesach? The teretz is Zeh Seike B'fnim. When you use an oven, where do you put the fire? On the inside. The oven has to withstand a much greater heat than a pot that you're just putting it over a fire. So a pot cannot withstand so much heat. The pot you heat up on the outside. And therefore, it's not enough heat to suck out all of the blias. That's why you got to destroy it. For that, you destroy it, heat it up on the inside. Just kasher it the way you're supposed to. Put coals inside the pot. Yes, you normally don't. But if you want, why you destroy the pot, kasher it. Zok Gemara, because we don't trust that anybody will do it properly, because chayis alayu demitpri. Since this pot, probably not as thick walls, it's not designed to withstand such heat. If you kasher it properly, it'll crack, it'll break. So we're afraid people won't kasher it properly. And therefore, pots you have to destroy, but ovens, yavad, you can heat up even cheres, and it'll get everything out. Hilchach, therefore, high kovia. I don't know what kuvi is. Rashi, it's re'efim chalulim k'moshvis there. It sounds some type of hollow pipe that you heat up. What is it? It's a tile ring. It's some type of.
An earthenware cylinder.
It's an earthenware cylinder that you heat it up and you put.
He broke Rashi.
I'm sorry?
He broke Rashi. It was inside for some.
Yeah, Rashi says re'efim chalulim k'moshvis kedera u'pa'amim shetachan noishay shemen ba'efim ba'lechem akari tichaya. So they would use it. They would use it almost like an oven. But since it's normally heated up from the outside, you don't put fire inside. Therefore, v'aser, because it has the same concern, you might not heat it up enough to kasher it properly. Okay, so now we're going to stop for a second before we go there. We still have 4 minutes, so I want to just zip through this Tosfos because it's such a halacha l'maisa dika Tosfos. Zok Tosfos iru l'soichei roi seyach. At the top of Tzaddikim Beis, Minayin Tamadoy Mashetuvu Shal B'Yishover. Mikal Bedaktik Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is a bedak from our sugya, the Iroi Kikli Rishon Midachashev Kemavushal. Iroi is just like a Kli Rishon. We fear it like that, right? We would never make Iroi Kli Rishon on Shabbos. V'nira the other Rabbi, Zok Tosfos, I disagree with Rabbeinu Tam. I think it's not called Bishul. The other Rabbi, Kosher Mikan. The Karilei B'Samach B'lu B'lai Bishul. We just considered if you pour hot water into a keli, the Gemara says that's called balua b'lai b'lishul. So yeah, it might make beliefs l'gabe isser v'heter if you milks and fleishiks, but l'gabe Shabbos there should be no problem. It's not bishul. You see, clear from our Gemara. V'yu yesh loymar the chashav lei balua b'lai bishul levishe'enim is bashal machmas akli the bechli acher is bashal. Maybe it's called balua b'lai bishul because it's not cooked machmas the kli because it was cooked in the other kli. So yes. The Kli Rishon cooked the water. When you pour it into the Kli Cheres, when you pour it into another Kli Cheres, that Kli Cheres didn't cook the water. It didn't cook the water. The water might cook what it hits, but that keli didn't cook the water. The second keli didn't cook the water, so that's why it's called blue b'lebishol. But avada, it will cook, and therefore it's also in Shabbos. Rabbeinu Shmuel imedaktik the irei klisheni. Rabbeinu Shmuel wanted to say the fair ear is klisheni, and the klisheni is not mabashal. We heard it number per kira, ilfis, bakteria, shavir meroishchen, Lo yitain l'soichei tavlin. If you take a pot off the fire, you should not put spices into it. Why? Because it's a kli rishon. The mashram hala arish men al tavlin shari. But if you had another pot with spices in it, you'd be able to pour over. You'd be able to pour water from a kli rishon onto coffee, onto tea. That's what Rabbeinu Shmuel wanted to say. There's a machlokes of log over to tog over. Meaning, when you pour hot onto cold or cold onto hot, do we say it's hot or cold? So if you hold the tog over, that it's cold, so when you pour hot water onto cold meat, it's tatog over, it's cold, and therefore the hot water didn't cook the cold meat. That's what tatog over means. The Tanya of Osei Perkei Tzayden, v'yamata b'torkach larois roischen mechli rishon ala tarnagoylus kidei lemoilga. What they used to do to get the skin off, take the feathers off, they would pour hot water on it. But they would pour hot water on it before they did melicha. So the problem is, it would cook the dam inside it, and it would aser. But he held the belt, the old tatog govar, it doesn't cook, and therefore you could pour hot water on the dead chicken. Rabbeinu Tam Omer, the other Rabbi doik miseifa. Bring a rye from the sefer, that is a problem. Avol noisin l'soicha kaira. The sefer says you can put it in the kaira. You could put water in a different kaira and then put tavlin in. Halaris meal was al tavlin noser. So there's a question once again: can you pour water from a kli rishon onto tavlin, which is something that we discuss every day on Shabbos? Can you pour water from a kli rishon onto coffee? We have over here a machlokes Rishon, and we of course are makmer. Then he says, "Ubeji Yerushalmi mashma de ira kli rishon." In Yerushalmi, Tmasha ira is kli rishon. The Amrina Lobe Gemara ma'olitin tavlin milamata v'laris alei milamayla. Rabbi Yoina said ira kli rishon, and we brought a raya to Rabbi Yoina. Chayled Rabbi Yoina minado. Says b'chol chlicheres asher tavusal boy yishaver ainli el shabishal boy ira l'soicher yiseich minayin ar gemara tamud loimer asher tavusal boy yishaver mikol makay. So we bring a raya from our Gemara that it is called bishul, and we also know that even if you hold tatog over and it's cold, but ira is mevashal kedei klipa, so it does make a little bit of a bishul, and therefore we're makmer by ira klirishon. Okay, I think we'll stop here. There's a lot of very interesting, things on this sugya. A long thesis. Okay, Kavaldik. Shkoyach. Oh, how was your trip?
I didn't go anywhere. I'm going today.
Oh, you're going today?